I knew the moment Marcus Webb walked into my office that defending him would cost me everything I'd worked for, but I had no idea the price would be my brother's freedom. He sat across from my desk in the cramped 10th floor office overlooking Chicago's Loop, his hands folded so tightly the knuckles had gone white. Rain hammered the window behind me, casting shadows that made his face look even more hollow than it already was. Marcus was accused of murdering Daniel Reeves, a prominent real estate developer, in what the prosecution painted as a calculated execution over a failed business deal. The evidence was damning. Marcus's fingerprints on the murder weapon, his DNA under the victim's fingernails, security footage placing him at the building within the time of death window. But Marcus swore he was innocent, and something in his voice, a tremor of genuine confusion, made me believe him, or at least want to. "They're offering manslaughter," I said, sliding the plea agreement across the desk. 15 years, eligible for parole in 10. Marcus didn't even look at the paper. "I didn't kill him, Miss Chen. I can't confess to something I didn't do." I leaned back in my chair, studying him. Defense attorneys learn to read guilt in 1,000 micro-expressions, and Marcus showed none of them. No darting eyes, no rehearsed explanations, no attempt to charm or manipulate, just exhaustion and fear. The problem was that innocence doesn't win trials. Evidence does. And right now, every scrap of evidence pointed straight at him. "Then we go to trial," I said, "but I need you to understand what that means. The Cook County State's attorney wants this case. Sandra Kowalski is prosecuting personally, and she doesn't lose. Ever." "I know who she is." "Good. Then you know she'll tear apart every second of your life, every mistake, every lie you've ever told, every person you've ever wronged. She'll make the jury hate you before I even get to cross-examine her first witness." Marcus finally met my eyes. "I have a daughter, Miss Chen. She's 8. If I take that plea, she grows up knowing her father was a murderer. If we fight and lose, at least she'll know I tried to tell the truth." That was the moment I should have walked away. I had enough cases, enough headaches, enough sleepless nights second-guessing my choices. But I thought about my own daughter, thought about what I'd want someone to do for me, and I heard myself saying the words that would unravel my entire world. "Okay, Marcus, let's fight." The preliminary hearing was a bloodbath. Judge Patricia Marino presided with a kind of stern efficiency that made even seasoned attorneys straighten their spines. She'd been on the bench for 20 years, a former prosecutor who knew every trick in the book and had no patience for theatrics. Sandra Kowalski presented her case with surgical precision, each piece of evidence laid out like stones in a wall. The gun, a 9mm Glock registered to Marcus Webb. The fingerprints, a perfect match on the grip and trigger. The footage, grainy but unmistakable, showing Marcus entering the building at 9:47 p.m. I fought back where I could, challenging chain of custody, questioning the timeline, planting seeds of doubt. But Moreno bound Marcus over for trial without hesitation, and as the marshals led him back to lockup, he looked at me with an expression I couldn't quite read. Hope, maybe, or resignation masquerading as hope. Back at my office, I spread the discovery documents across my conference table and started the real work. Every criminal case is a puzzle, and somewhere in these thousands of pages was the piece that didn't fit. Police reports, witness statements, forensic analyses, phone records. I read until my eyes burned, until the words blurred together, until the cleaning crew knocked and reminded me they needed to vacuum. It was past midnight when I found the first inconsistency. The medical examiner placed time of death between 9:30 and 10:15 based on liver temperature and rigor mortis. But the security footage showed Marcus leaving the building at 10:03, and the 911 call reporting gunshots came in at 9:56. If Marcus had shot Daniel Reeves, he would have had to do it, flee the scene, and somehow be captured on camera, leaving 7 minutes after the police were already being dispatched. The timeline was tight, maybe impossible. I called Marcus's cell from jail the next morning. "Did you hear the gunshots?" "What?" "When you were in the building that night, did you hear shots fired?" Silence stretched between us, broken only by the hiss of the prison phone system. "I don't know," he said finally. "Maybe. There was a lot of noise, construction on the 3rd floor, people shouting. I was focused on getting the contracts from Reeves' office." "You told me you never made it to his office." I didn't. His assistant said he had already left. I waited maybe 5 minutes and then headed out. Who was this assistant? I don't know her name. Blonde woman, late 20s, looked nervous. I wrote that down, underlined it twice. The police reports mention no assistant, no blonde woman, no witness who could place Marcus away from the actual murder scene. Either Marcus was lying, or someone had been deliberately left out of the investigation. Discovery is a marathon, not a sprint, and over the next 4 weeks, I buried myself in paper. Kowalski's office turned over evidence in waves, sometimes helpful, usually not, always timed to maximize my workload. I deposed the responding officers, the forensic techs, the building security guard. Everyone told the same story. Marcus Webb arrived at the building, went upstairs, Daniel Reeves was found dead, Marcus fled, and was arrested 6 hours later at his home. Clean, simple, convincing. Except it wasn't. The more I dug, the more questions emerged. Daniel Reeves had been involved in a dozen lawsuits, owed money to dangerous people, had business partners who'd threatened him publicly. The police had tunnel visioned on Marcus and stopped looking at anyone else. I filed motions to compel, demanding witness lists and evidence logs, pushing Kowalski to show me everything. She fought me on every line, and Judge Moreno split the baby, giving me some victories and shutting down others. Jury selection started on a cold Monday in February. Voir dire is theater, psychology, and poker all mixed together. And I needed to find 12 people who could look past the evidence and see reasonable doubt. Kowalski wanted law and order types, retirees who trusted the system, anyone who'd convict on the prosecution's reputation alone. I needed skeptics, people who'd been failed by institutions, anyone who understood that police sometimes got it wrong. We spent 2 days questioning prospective jurors, probing their biases and beliefs. Kowalski struck anyone who'd ever been arrested, and I struck anyone who'd lost a loved one to violence. By the end, we had our jury. 7 women, 5 men, mostly middle-aged, mostly white, with 2 black jurors and 1 Latina woman who worked as a teacher and gave me hope because she said she believed in second chances. If justice matters to you, stay with me. Opening statements began on Wednesday. The courtroom was packed. Journalists filling the back rows, Marcus's daughter sitting with his mother in the second row behind the defense table. I watched Kowalski stand and button her blazer, watched her walk to the jury box with the confidence of someone who'd never lost a winnable case. "Ladies and gentlemen," she began, "this is a case about a man who killed for greed. Daniel Reeves was a successful businessman, a father, a pillar of this community. Marcus Webb was his partner in a real estate venture that went bad. When Mr. Reeves refused to bail out Mr. Webb's failing investments, the defendant made a choice. He picked up a gun, went to Mr. Reeves' office, and shot him 3 times in the chest. The evidence will show you that choice with absolute clarity. The defendant's fingerprints on the murder weapon, his DNA under the victim's fingernails from the struggle, security footage placing him at the scene. This isn't a mystery, ladies and gentlemen. This is murder, plain and simple." She spoke for 20 minutes, laying out her case with devastating efficiency. Every fact, every piece of evidence, every reasonable inference pointed at Marcus like an arrow. When she sat down, I could feel the jury's eyes on my client, could sense them making judgments, building narratives. I had to knock that narrative down before it hardened into certainty. I stood slowly, letting silence fill the courtroom. This was the moment that mattered. The first time I could speak directly to the people who held Marcus's fate in their hands. Ms. Kowalski just told you this case is simple, but murder is never simple, and neither is justice. The prosecution wants you to believe that Marcus Webb is a killer because his fingerprints are on a gun, but they won't tell you how those fingerprints got there. They want you to believe Marcus is guilty because he was in that building, but they won't tell you about the other people who were there, the people they never investigated. The blonde woman Marcus saw, but the police never bothered to find. They want you to believe their timeline, but they won't explain how Marcus could have committed murder at 9:56 p.m. when he was captured on camera leaving the building 7 minutes later. This case isn't simple, ladies and gentlemen. It's incomplete. And when you hear all the evidence, when you see all the holes in the prosecution's story, you'll understand that the only just verdict is not guilty. The trial unfolded in a rhythm, prosecution witnesses building the case day by day. The medical examiner testified about the bullet wounds, 3 shots to the chest fired from close range. The forensic technician walked through the fingerprint analysis, showing the jury how Marcus's prints matched the ones on the Glock. The security guard described seeing Marcus in the lobby looking agitated and nervous. Each witness was professional, prepared, devastating. I cross-examined carefully, probing for weaknesses without making the jury think I was bullying honest people just doing their jobs. I got the ME to admit the time of death window was an estimate, not a certainty. I got the tech to acknowledge that fingerprints could be transferred or planted. I got the guard to concede that Marcus hadn't been carrying a weapon when he entered the building, that he'd seemed more frustrated than violent. Small victories, but victories nonetheless. The real battle came when Kowalski called Detective Raymond Harris to the stand. Harris had led the investigation, a 20-year veteran with a sterling clearance rate and the kind of weathered face that made juries trust him instinctively. He testified about finding Marcus at home, about the arrest, about how Marcus had remained silent during questioning. Kowalski walked him through every piece of evidence, every step of the investigation, painting Marcus as a man who'd murdered in cold blood and then tried to hide. When my turn came, I stood and approached the witness stand with my heart hammering. Cross-examination is war by other means, and I needed to wound Harris without making the jury sympathize with him. Detective Harris, you arrested Marcus Webb approximately 6 hours after Daniel Reeves was killed, correct? That's correct. And in those 6 hours, did you investigate anyone else? We followed the evidence. That's not what I asked. Did you investigate anyone else, yes or no? We looked into Mr. Reeves's business associates initially. For how long? I don't recall exactly. I walked back to the defense table and picked up a police report. According to your own incident log, you spent less than 30 minutes interviewing Daniel Reeves's business partner before focusing exclusively on Marcus Webb. Is that accurate? We had strong evidence pointing to the defendant. You had Marcus's fingerprints on a gun. Did you investigate how those fingerprints got there? The defendant had motive and opportunity. Detective, please answer my question. Did you investigate any scenario in which someone else might have placed that gun in Marcus Webb's hands, in which he might have touched it without using it to kill anyone? No. Did you search for the blonde woman Marcus says he spoke to that night? Harris frowned. The defendant never mentioned a blonde woman in his statement. He gave no statement, Detective. He invoked his right to remain silent, which is his constitutional right. But his attorney, me, provided you with that information during discovery. Did you follow up? We had no evidence such a person existed. Did you review the building's employment records to see who worked in Daniel Reeves' office? Mr. Reeves was a private contractor. He didn't have a traditional office staff. So you didn't check. Kowalski stood. Objection, argumentative. Sustained, said Judge Marino. I glanced at the jury. 2 of them were leaning forward, paying attention. That was enough. Detective Harris, you testified that the 911 call came in at 9:56 p.m., correct? Yes. And the security footage shows Marcus Webb leaving the building at 10:03, 7 minutes later. Approximately, yes. So if Marcus Webb killed Daniel Reeves, he would have shot him, struggled with him enough to leave DNA under his fingernails, flee the scene, and then somehow still be in the building 7 minutes after someone called the police. Does that make sense to you? The defendant could have been leaving from an unsuccessful attempt to hide. Or he could have been leaving because he never fired a weapon at all. Objection, speculation. Sustained. I returned to my seat knowing I'd planted enough doubt to make the jury think. The rest of the prosecution's case played out over the next 2 days. Phone records showing angry texts between Marcus and Reeves, financial documents proving Marcus was desperate for money, character witnesses who described Marcus as volatile and unpredictable. Kowalski was building a portrait of a man capable of murder, and I couldn't deny that some of it stuck. Then came the key moment, the witness I'd been waiting for. Kowalski called Jennifer Preston, Daniel Reeves' executive assistant. I'd found her name buried in the company's corporate filings, and when I'd tracked her down, she'd been reluctant to talk. Now, under oath, she had no choice. Preston was in her late 50s, gray-haired and composed, wearing a black dress that signaled mourning. She testified about working for Reeves for 10 years, about what a great man he'd been, about seeing Marcus Webb in the office on multiple occasions arguing about money. Everything Kowalski needed to paint Marcus as a violent threat. When I stood for cross-examination, I noticed Preston's hands tighten on the witness stand railing.
Miss Preston, you worked for Daniel Reeves for a decade, correct? Yes. You knew his schedule, his meetings, his business dealings? I coordinated much of his calendar, yes. Were you working on the night he was killed? Preston hesitated, just for a fraction of a second. No, I'd left for the day. What time did you leave? Around 6 p.m. And you didn't return? No. I walked to the defense table and picked up a document. Miss Preston, I'm showing you what's been marked as Defense Exhibit 14. Can you identify this? She studied it, her face paling. It's a keycard access log from Daniel Reeves' building, correct? Yes. And this log shows that your keycard was used to access the 8th floor at 9:42 p.m. on the night Daniel Reeves was killed. Can you explain that? The courtroom went silent. Kowalski was on her feet immediately. Objection, Your Honor. This exhibit wasn't included in the defense witness list. It's impeachment evidence, Your Honor. The witness just testified she wasn't in the building. Judge Moreno studied the document. I'll allow it. Miss Preston, please answer the question. Preston's voice was barely a whisper. I must have forgotten. I did go back that night. You forgot going to work on the night your boss was murdered? I was upset. Everything from that night is a blur. Why did you go back? Daniel called me. He said he needed a file. What file? I don't remember. Did you see Marcus Webb? No. Did you see Daniel Reeves? Briefly. I gave him the file and left. What time did you leave? I don't know. Maybe 9:50? So you were in the building, on the 8th floor, at the exact time Daniel Reeves was killed, and you forgot to mention this to the police? I told you, I was traumatized. Or you were lying. Objection. Withdrawn. No further questions. Preston left the stand looking shaken, and I could see the jury's faces shifting, doubt creeping in. Kowalski spent the rest of the day trying to shore up her case, but the damage was done. Someone else had been there, someone with access and opportunity, and the police had never investigated her. If stories like this resonate, consider subscribing. That night, I was working late when my phone rang. The number was blocked, but I answered anyway, expecting a journalist or a crank caller trying to intimidate me. Instead, I heard my brother's voice, tight with fear. Allie, I need you to drop the Webb case. I sat up straight, adrenaline flooding my system. Ryan? Where are you? We've been looking for you for 6 months. Ryan was my younger brother, a kid who made bad choices and worse friends. He'd disappeared last summer owing money to people who didn't forgive debts, and I assumed he'd either left the country or ended up in a shallow grave. Hearing his voice was a shock I wasn't prepared for. Listen to me, he said. You need to lose this case. Take the plea deal. Let Marcus Webb go to prison. What are you talking about? Ryan, what's going on? He can't explain. Just trust me. If you get Webb acquitted, people will die. Do you understand? No, I don't understand. Tell me what this has to do with you. The line went dead. I tried calling back, but the number was blocked. I sat in my office for an hour, my mind racing, trying to connect dots that didn't make sense. Ryan and Marcus Webb had no connection that I knew of. Ryan had never been involved in real estate, never worked with Daniel Reeves. But the panic in his voice had been real, and Ryan had never been a good liar. I spent the next day distracted, going through the motions of trial prep, while my mind churned. The defense case was scheduled to start Monday, and I had to decide whether to put Marcus on the stand. It was always a gamble. Juries wanted to hear from defendants, but Kowalski would eviscerate him on cross if he wasn't perfect. I met with Marcus that evening, prepping him on potential questions, watching for any sign that he knew more than he was telling me. Did you ever meet my brother? I asked suddenly. Marcus looked confused. Your brother? I don't think so. Why? Ryan Chen, 5'10", dark hair, usually looks like he hasn't slept in a week. Doesn't ring a bell. Should it?
I studied his face, looking for deception, but saw only honest bewilderment. Maybe Ryan was mixed up in something else, something unrelated. Or maybe I was missing a connection that would make everything clear. Monday morning, I called my first witness, a forensic expert named Dr. Michael Torres, who specialized in ballistics. Torres had reviewed the evidence at my request and found inconsistencies in the police analysis. He testified that the bullet trajectory suggested the shooter was significantly taller than Marcus, that the powder burns indicated the gun had been fired from further away than the prosecution claimed. Kowalski fought back hard on cross, getting Torres to admit these were just alternative interpretations, not definitive proof of innocence. My second witness was the building's maintenance supervisor, who testified about the construction on the third floor that night, the noise and chaos that would have made it easy for someone to move through the building unnoticed. He'd seen several people coming and going, including a woman matching the description of the mysterious blonde. Kowalski dismissed him as unreliable, pointing out that he hadn't reported any of this to police at the time. Then came the decision I'd been dreading. I had to put Marcus on the stand. The jury needed to hear from him directly, needed to see that he was a human being, not a monster. I prepped him one final time before court, reminding him to stay calm, to answer only what was asked, to make eye contact with the jurors. Marcus testified for 3 hours, walking through the events of that night step by step. He admitted he'd been angry with Daniel Reeves, admitted they'd argued over money, admitted he'd gone to the building hoping to salvage their business relationship, but he'd never made it to Reeves's office, he insisted. The assistant had turned him away, and he'd left frustrated but non-violent. He'd touched the gun earlier that week when Reeves had shown it to him, bragging about buying it for protection. That explained the fingerprints. "Did you kill Daniel Reeves?" I asked. Marcus looked at the jury, his voice steady. "No, I did not." Kowalski's cross-examination was brutal. She went after every inconsistency, every moment of anger, every lie Marcus had ever told. She made him look desperate, aggressive, capable of violence. But he held up, never losing his temper, never giving her the explosion she wanted. When it was over, I thought we had a chance. The prosecution's rebuttal was brief, just a few witnesses to undermine our timeline. Then came closing arguments, our final chance to shape the narrative. Kowalski went first, summarizing all the evidence, all the proof that Marcus Webb was guilty. She was masterful, weaving everything together into a story that made conviction seem inevitable. When my turn came, I stood and looked at the jury, knowing this was it. Everything hinged on the next 20 minutes. Ladies and gentlemen, Miss Kowalski wants you to believe this case is simple, that Marcus Webb is guilty beyond a reasonable doubt. But reasonable doubt is exactly what this case is built on. Doubt about the timeline that doesn't add up. Doubt about the investigation that ignored other suspects. Doubt about the evidence that could have multiple explanations. Jennifer Preston was in that building at the exact time of the murder, and the police never questioned her until we forced her to testify. The gun Marcus allegedly used was shown to him days before by Daniel Reeves himself, explaining the fingerprints without any murder. The security footage shows Marcus leaving after the police were called, which makes no sense if he's a killer fleeing the scene. The prosecution wants you to fill in the gaps with assumptions, to convict based on suspicion. But that's not how justice works. The law requires proof beyond a reasonable doubt, and there is doubt everywhere you look in this case. Marcus Webb is not guilty, and you must find him so. The courtroom filled quickly, journalists jostling for position, spectators cramming into every available seat. Marcus sat beside me, his hands folded on the table, his breathing shallow. I'd told him a quick verdict usually meant guilty, but this hadn't been quick. 2 days was an eternity, time enough for doubt to fester and grow. Judge Moreno entered, and we all stood. The jury filed in, their faces unreadable. I tried to make eye contact, tried to gauge which way they'd gone, but they looked everywhere except at the defense table. As the jury reached a verdict, Moreno asked. The 4 persons stood, a middle-aged man in a cardigan who'd seemed sympathetic during testimony. "We have, Your Honor. What say you? In the case of the People versus Marcus Webb, on the charge of murder in the first degree, we find the defendant not guilty." The courtroom erupted. Marcus collapsed into tears, his mother wailing from the gallery, his daughter shouting that her daddy was free. Kowalski sat motionless, her face a mask of professional disappointment. Judge Moreno banged her gavel, calling for order, but the chaos continued for minutes. I felt relief, triumph, exhaustion all at once. We'd won. Against all odds, against overwhelming evidence, we'd won. Marcus grabbed my hand, squeezing it so hard I thought he might break bones, thanking me over and over. I wanted to feel joy, wanted to celebrate, but all I could think about was Ryan's warning, the fear in his voice, the certainty that this verdict would have consequences. The marshals removed Marcus's shackles, and he was free to go. His family surrounded him, pulling him into embraces, crying and laughing simultaneously. I packed my briefcase slowly, letting them have their moment, wondering what came next. Kowalski approached as I was leaving. "Good work," she said, extending her hand. "You beat me fair and square." I shook it, surprised by the genuine respect in her eyes. "You're a hell of an opponent. For what it's worth, I think you believed in him. That matters." She walked away, and I stood alone in the empty courtroom, feeling the weight of victory settle like a stone in my chest. Tell me in the comments what you'd have done. I didn't go home that night. Instead, I drove to the address Ryan had texted me an hour after the verdict, a warehouse on the south side that looked abandoned. He was waiting inside, surrounded by cardboard boxes and shadows. "You won," he said. It wasn't a question. "I did my job. Now tell me what's going on." Ryan lit a cigarette, his hands shaking. Daniel Reeves wasn't just a real estate developer. He was laundering money for the Sinaloa cartel, using construction projects to move cash across borders. I was one of his couriers, moving money through shell companies. When he got killed, the cartel thought someone was trying to cut them out. They wanted Marcus convicted because he was a convenient patsy, someone to close the case so law enforcement would stop digging. My stomach turned. And if Marcus was acquitted? They'd know someone else killed Reeves, which means someone's trying to take over the operation. They'll start a war to find out who, and people in the way, people like you who ask too many questions, become targets. You're saying I put Marcus's life in danger by proving he was innocent? I'm saying you put yourself in danger. The cartel knows you found Jennifer Preston, knows you exposed her. She was Reeves's partner, Allie. She killed him to take over the business, and now she knows you know. I felt sick. Why didn't you tell me this before? Because I was trying to protect you. If you'd lost, if Marcus had been convicted, Preston would have stayed quiet, and the cartel would have moved on. But now, he gestured helplessly. Now everything's exposed. What happens to Marcus? Marcus is fine. He was never part of this. But you need to disappear for a while. Let things cool down. I thought about my daughter, about my practice, about the life I'd built. I can't just leave. Then be careful. Very careful. Ryan dropped his cigarette and crushed it under his boot. Then he walked into the shadows and was gone, leaving me alone with the consequences of doing what I thought was right. The next morning, the news broke. Jennifer Preston had been arrested on suspicion of murder, and federal agents had raided Daniel Reeves's business offices, seizing records that allegedly showed a massive money laundering operation. The story dominated the headlines, reporters calling Preston the Black Widow of Chicago, speculating about cartel connections and conspiracy theories. My phone rang constantly with interview requests, but I ignored them all. Marcus called to thank me again, oblivious to the danger swirling around us. He was going to rebuild his life, he said, spend time with his daughter, start over. I told him I was happy for him, and meant it, even though happiness felt like something from another lifetime. 3 weeks later, a man approached me outside my office building. He was Latino, mid-40s, wearing an expensive suit that didn't quite hide the bulge under his jacket. He handed me an envelope without a word and walked away. Inside was a single photograph, my daughter on the playground at her school, circled in red marker. I called Ryan immediately, but his phone was disconnected. I called the police, but what could I tell them? That I'd successfully defended a client and now the cartel was threatening me? I had no proof, no evidence, just a photo and a brother who'd vanished again into whatever hole he'd crawled out of. I hired private security, moved my daughter to my mother's house in Michigan, and stopped sleeping. Every car that slowed down near my office, every unfamiliar face in the courthouse, every late-night phone call sent adrenaline spiking through my veins. I'd won the case, saved an innocent man, and destroyed my own peace of mind in the process. 2 months later, Jennifer Preston was convicted of first-degree murder. The evidence against her was overwhelming once federal agents started looking. Financial records showing her embezzlement, text messages proving she'd lured Reeves to his office that night, security footage the local police had somehow missed showing her fleeing the building minutes before Marcus arrived. She was sentenced to life without parole, and the cartel operation was dismantled in a series of coordinated raids across 3 states. Ryan surfaced one final time, calling from a number I didn't recognize. "It's over," he said. "Preston cut a deal, gave up the cartel connections. You're safe now." Am I? As safe as anyone who pissed off powerful people can be. For what it's worth, I'm proud of you. You did the right thing. The right thing nearly got my daughter killed. But it didn't. And Marcus Webb is free because of you. That counts for something. The line went dead before I could respond, and I haven't heard from Ryan since. Some nights I wonder if he's still alive, if he's hiding somewhere with a new name and a new life, or if the cartels caught up with him the way they almost caught up with me. Most nights I try not to think about it at all. Marcus sends me a card every year on the anniversary of his acquittal, always with a picture of his daughter, growing up, getting older, living the life she wouldn't have had if I'd taken that plea deal. Those cards are the only reminders I keep of the case, the only evidence that any of it mattered. I still practice law, still take on impossible cases, still fight for clients everyone else has written off. But I'm more careful now about the questions I ask and the doors I open. Justice, I learned, isn't just about winning or losing, guilty or not guilty. It's about consequences, about the ripples that spread from every verdict, touching lives in ways you can't predict or control. Marcus Webb was innocent, and I proved it. And that victory cost me something I'll never get back. The belief that doing the right thing is always simple, that defending the innocent is always safe, that justice and survival are somehow the same thing. They're not. But I'd make the same choice again, consequences and all, because that's what it means to be a defense attorney. You fight for the truth even when the truth is dangerous, even when winning means losing something else, even when the verdict that sets your client free leaves you looking over your shoulder for the rest of your life. That's the price, and I paid it willingly, and I'd pay it again tomorrow if another Marcus Webb walked through my door with fear in his eyes and truth on his lips. Because in the end, justice isn't about safety or certainty or happy endings. It's about fighting for what's right, even when everything else is wrong, even when the cost is higher than you ever imagined, even when the only reward is knowing you didn't look away when it mattered most. And that, more than any verdict or victory or vindication, is what keeps me showing up to court every morning, ready to fight another impossible battle for another desperate client who deserves someone in their corner, no matter what it costs me to stand there.